Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to another session. Today we're going to be looking at the integrals of prayer. Now, the complete prayer consists of quite a few elements. They consist of the integrals, the necessary acts, and the sunnahs. Now, in this lesson, we're only going to be discussing the integral parts, and the next lesson we're going to look at the necessary, and then the lesson after we're going to look at the sunnahs, and then following on to the disliked actions. Now, we mentioned last lesson that we have conditions. There are conditions before you start. The prayer is contingent on conditions that are from outside the prayer, and then inside the prayer they are what's known as integrals, the obligatory elements. Now, what are the obligatory elements? The opening invocation, the standing, the recitation, the bowing, prostration, the final sitting, and then ending the prayer. These things must be done. If any of these things are left out, we say you don't have a prayer and you have to repeat your prayer. Now, let's have a look at these one by one. Okay, so it says integrals make up the essence of the prayer. Without them, the prayer is invalid. Okay, so the actual core of the prayer, the essence of the prayer is done with the integrals. When it comes to the necessary elements, that's to do with the soundness of the prayer, and the sunnahs are to do with the properness of the prayer. So now we're only going to look at, as I mentioned, I gave the metaphor of a skeleton, right? So we're going to look at the bare bone structure of the prayer now. So the pillars of the ritual prayer are the tahrima, according to Imam Muhammad, while according to the other two Imams, it's a conditions as listed above. Now, we mentioned before in the previous lesson that it was a condition. Now here, Imam Muhammad is saying it's one of the integrals, whereas the other two Imams say it's one of the conditions. But we're gonna keep it to being a condition, and we're just gonna it's here, so we're gonna keep it here, but we're gonna remember the order that we had from the previous lesson. And it doesn't really make a difference whether somebody thinks it's a condition or somebody thinks it's an integral. It's part of the prayer and it must be done. The dominant opinion is that it's a condition, as I just explained. So standing, if one is physically able, except for nawafil prayers. Okay, so the first integral here is standing. You must stand for the obligatory prayer. When it comes to the nawafil prayers and the sunnahs, except for the sunnah of Fajr prayer, when it comes to the rest of your sunnahs and the supererogatory prayers, you can sit and pray. If you sit and pray without an excuse, the reward is lessened. It's half the reward. And if there's an excuse, then you've got an excuse. But when it comes to the fard prayers, you have to stand. You have to stand for them. Standing here means that your hands do not reach your knees. So if someone's standing up straight, they're not slouching forward like this. You know, sometimes you see a person, like in their humility, they're kind of really, really bent forward. There's no need for that. You stand straight, you stand at ease, you stand as a humble slave. And standing here, the technical meaning here is that you are standing in a position that your hands do not reach your knees. If you bend to a certain point, it's not here, it's actually here. Your hands will reach your knees. So it basically means to stand straight. Hunchback or due to natural weakness is excused. Sometimes you see old people or someone who's done their back in, they will stand like this, right? They're excused because there's nothing that they can do about that. They have no choice but to stand in that position. Everybody else who's able to stand straight must stand straight. Stand with 4 finger space between the feet. It's recommended to stand where there's only 4 fingers between your feet, right? So it's actually kind of standing. So if these are my 2 feet, there's only a gap of this much between my feet. Now that makes for a more humble position of standing, which I'm going to explain now. Now, Nu'man ibn Bashir narrates a hadith, and he witnessed this event when he was very, very small, because he was born in the last 10 years of the life of Rasulullah. So there are a few narrations where Rasulullah would make the people straighten their rows. Now, Nu'man ibn Bashir said that when Rasulullah told us to straighten our rows, we started to straighten our rows to the extent that shoulder to shoulder, ankle to ankle, foot to foot. Now this has been taken out of all context by many people you see now, that they literally try to fight with you in the mosque to do this. there's no reason to actually mention this in our course, but the only reason I'm mentioning is that this is a thing that's become so prolific now, without any basis or without any understanding, that it's got to a stage where if I turn around and say there should be a gap of only this much, right? Most people have heard a hadith mentioning that you should stand very close, and and then they hear the commentary, which is shoulder to shoulder, feet to feet, ankle to ankle. Now, we'll have a look at that in a minute, but Ibn Hajar, right? He in his Fath al-Bari, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he has a commentary called Fath al-Bari on Bukhari, and he himself mentions the understanding of this hadith that it's a form of exaggeration, right? It's a form of exaggeration where people say, oh, we stood like this, we stood like this. And for the people that normally do this, the Ghair Muqallid, the ones that tend not to follow any madahib, they follow Imam Shawkani. Imam Shawkani himself says in his book, with the reference given, that it just means basically straightening your rows to the best of your ability. It just means straightening your rows. Now, if somebody decides, you'll see people like with their feet this wide apart, and they stand to pray, right? They stand to pray, even if they're praying alone, they stand to pray in this very unnatural position. They'll end up doing this to their feet. They'll stand in a very strange posture, and it's a posture of aggression, actually. It's when you face your enemy, you normally stand like this, right? You normally stand like that, making yourself larger than you really are. It's not a posture of humility. It's not a posture of humility. When you stand in front of a king, you wouldn't stand like that. And Allah is the King of Kings. He is the Almighty. He is our Lord. To stand in front of Him in a posture like this doesn't denote humility. In fact, it shows the opposite. And especially when you're trying to, if this hadith was exactly what it meant it was, right? If this hadith was actually what it meant, when Rasulullah said, straighten your rows, and then a companion started to do this, let's say it was like this, right? Then think about it. You're spending more time fidgeting and rubbing to the person on your left and right, tightening your rows. You're gonna be in a cramped position. You're struggling to get comfortable, and it happens normally in the mosques when people do this to you. You struggle to get comfortable, and then your feet are touching each other. You're not comfortable. You're trying to. It's not like the natural standing positions. Your feet are like that. They're not like that or like that. They're gonna be like that. So then to get the ankle to touch, it's impossible. It's an unnatural position. You're fighting, and then to get the knees to touch. How are you going to get the knees to touch now? Right? It's not physically possible to get the ankles and the knees to touch at the same time, and then to get the shoulders to touch. Right? So it's impossible to do this in the first place. People struggle to do this, and then to be doing this, you can see that they're more concentrating on this than the actual prayer. Where is the heart? Where is your soul? Where are you in the prayer? Are you connected with God, or are you connected with your feet and your neighbor's feet? Right? So we need to understand this. There's a gross misunderstanding of this hadith. The literature is full of explaining this hadith in its proper context. Right? So we don't need to stand in a position where we're struggling to make the rows, we're struggling to be at ease. When I'm praying to my Lord, I want to be at ease. Stand at ease. And it's a humble position to be standing like this, right? And to be standing and looking on the ground ahead of me and focusing on my Lord, as opposed to standing with a wide gait, right? A wide stance, fighting with the people next to me, jostling up, making sure, telling him during prayer, do this, do that. Where is my mind? When they tell you during prayer, step back, where is the mind of the guy who's telling me during prayer, step back? It's obviously not connected with Allah. He's more concerned about the rows. He's more concerned about where I'm standing in relation to him than he is about he's not absorbed in his prayer. So just a simple note here on this hadith. Recitation, even one verse of the Quran in 2 units of the Fard prayer and all units of Witr and Nafil, unless one is a follower in congregation. Okay, first of all, if you're in congregation, we don't recite. We do not recite anything except for saying Allahu Akbar. You say Allahu Akbar, then every single recitation that you do, that you hear, you do not recite. So when you hear the Imam recite the Surah Fatiha and then he recites a surah after that, you just listen to that. The only time you are meant to say something is when you go into your bowing actions and then your sitting actions and your prostration actions. Apart from that, he does a recitation and you listen. But if you're praying on your own, in the obligatory elements, for you to recite one verse, even one verse of the Quran. One verse. Now we've been told it's Surah Fatiha. I'm going to get to that in a minute. We're talking about the integrals, the fard, the fara'id. We're talking about what is obligatory in your prayer. The minimum you need to do to make the prayer obligatory, to make the prayer pass, right? It's to recite one verse. So that verse, the smallest verse in the Quran is Thumma Nadar, right? Or you can say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, or Qul Huwallahu Ahad. These are one ayahs, right? One verse from the Quran is sufficient for you to have fulfilled the fard, the obligatory element, integral of the prayer. In 2 units of the fard prayer and all units of the witr. So when it comes to the witr, in all units you need to recite the minimum, which is one verse. When it comes to your supererogatory prayers and sunnahs, again it's one verse in all cycles. When it comes to your fard prayer, in any 2 cycles. In any 2 cycles, you can recite one verse of the Quran. Just one verse, that's it. And then you can go into your bowing. Surah Fatiha is wajib and thus affects the soundness and not the validity. So as I mentioned, the obligatory integrals affect the validity. The necessary, which is the wajib, affect the soundness, and then the sunnahs affect the properness of the prayer. So we're learning the obligatory integrals here at the moment. That's why one verse is enough. So here's a small chart, the maximum recitation for a valid prayer. The obligatory prayer, one verse in any 2 cycles. For the necessary prayer, the necessary element is one verse in all cycles. For a necessary prayer, one verse in all cycles, and for a supererogatory prayer, one verse in all cycles. We're concerned here with the recitation in the obligatory prayer, which is one verse in any 2 cycles. Then when you pray, then if you were praying a necessary prayer, like that would be the witr prayer, in all cycles one verse. And then when you pray the sunnahs or the supererogatory prayer, it would be one verse in all cycles, whether they're 4 or 2. Ruku, bowing. So another integral is bowing. This is bowing, right? Bowing such that your hands, if you were standing, your hands when you bow reach your knees. Now you'll find some people bow down to here, right? They think it's an act of humbleness to bow down even more. They push amongst their legs. We're not pushing amongst your legs. We're not bowing down further than you need to go. A perfect bowing is a 90-degree bow. And even if somebody were to bow above the 90 degrees, their hands would touch their knees, and that would suffice for them. That is considered now a bowing. That's considered a bowing, right? So sometimes you see people when they're rushing through their prayer, they stand, and then they don't even completely bow. They bend their legs, right? That actually brings their hands closer down towards their knees. They'll bend their legs and do a little half bow. Their hands have touched their knees, and they think that's a bow. Right? That's incorrect. You need to have bowed. You need to have bowed enough that your hands touch your knees, and a perfect bow is a 45-degree angle bow. Sujood, then the other integral is the prostration with one's forehead, 2 hands, 2 knees, and bottom of the toes of both feet. So this is the strictest opinion in the school, that your head, your forehead, 2 hands, 2 knees, and 2 feet. But there is an opinion that as long as your head touches, everything else is wajib. As long as your head touches, the most important thing is your head. But we're obviously learning what our Imam has taught us here in this book, so we're going to stick to what the Imam is teaching us, and what the Imam teaches us suffices us in all scenarios, because it will cover you in everything. So what he means here is that the least that should touch the ground when you prostrate is the forehead, or a part of the forehead, a hand, a knee, and a foot, right? If these are connected to the ground, then you've fulfilled the integral, and in all instances everybody's gonna prostrate properly anyway, with the forehead, 2 hands, 2 knees, and the 2 feet. The final sitting for the length of time it takes for one to recite the tashahhud. Now the tashahhud is a recitation that's probably around 10 seconds to recite. If you were to recite it fast, you need to sit for that. Now it's wajib to recite it, right? But to sit for the length of that is fard. It's obligatory. So you need to sit in your sitting, you need to sit for the length of that. And then the last one is for you to exit the prayer. For you to exit the prayer. Now to say your salams is again wajib. How does one exit the prayer? To exit the prayer, according to the obligatory element of exiting the prayer, any action you do that is not from the prayer, that is outside of the prayer, is a way of exiting, right? Obviously we do our salams, but here, for example, just getting up and walking away. Just getting up and walking away, you've exited the prayer. But this is the bare minimum. This isn't the way we normally pray, but this is the bare minimum, as in the bare bone structure of the prayer. So once again, here's the chart. So the integrals of a valid prayer are what? The standing, the recitation, the bowing, prostration, final sitting, and the end of prayer, as we just mentioned now. Now, a prayer like this was a prayer that the Prophet ﷺ never prayed. None of the companions prayed like this. So you're thinking, why am I learning something that seems strange? The Prophet ﷺ never prayed and the companions never prayed. The Prophet ﷺ never prayed and the companions never prayed is because they prayed a complete prayer. This is the bare bone structure of a prayer, that you must know what is the obligatory element, the necessary element, and the sunnahs. So we're basically dissecting the prayer now, right? And if you were to do just the obligatory elements, you'd have a prayer. Nobody would say he hasn't prayed, but your prayer would not be sound and you'd have to repeat it again. Now, where would you pray where would you do this kind of a prayer? So it's blameworthy to not be able to break down the prayer like this. It must be memorized, right? So for students of knowledge and anybody who's learning the fiqh, to make sure that they discharge your obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're a student of knowledge. So it's blameworthy to not know this order, because knowing the way that we are going to teach these lessons, it will safeguard you from a lot of problems. It will stop you from having waswas, and you will know for sure what part of the prayer you've done and what part you haven't done, and how to make up for it as well. And there are going to be scenarios in your life where you may have to do this, right? And in that situation, better than not praying is to pray. Nobody would say, okay, leave the prayer. So you don't have a situation when it takes literally a minute to pray like this. So, for example, a new Muslim, if somebody became Muslim today, he's obliged to pray straight away. He's obliged to pray straight away. You're not going to say, okay, go and remember the prayer. Okay, if you're intelligent, you'll do it in 3 days. If you're not intelligent, or you do it in a week, or in 2 weeks, or if you're lazy, you'll do it in 3 weeks and a month. Meanwhile, 5 prayers a day are obligated upon him, and he's sinning for not doing them, right? Whereas if he were to be taught this, listen, one verse in the Quran, everybody can memorize one verse in an hour or so, one tiny verse, right? Everybody can memorize the order. Okay, one verse, okay, and then just go into the bowing. Don't say nothing. Bow, stand up, sit down. Don't say nothing. Sit down, sit up, and then bow again. First cycle, repeat the second cycle. If it's 4 cycles, repeat the 4 cycles like this. Everybody can do this, right? So in a situation like this, you get them doing this straight away. They've discharged their duties to God, while at the same time they're learning their prayers, right? As opposed to not doing them for weeks and weeks, and then after a few weeks he may think, oh, I can't do this, and he's really in the habit of, I'm a Muslim now and I'm not praying, so it's okay, I'll just take my time, and if some people don't pray, I'm not going to pray as well. So you get them on the prayer straight away, and that's how you do it. Second thing is, for example, children when they learn to pray, if you break it down like this to them, so they learn it correctly from the beginning, right? And if they're close to puberty and puberty starts and they don't know their prayer, again they're sinning, right? So then again you get them onto this kind of a prayer as they learn they learn the rest of the prayer, and then the rest of the way to pray as well. Or when the time is literally about to exit. So for example, a woman who's come off her menstruation and she's only got half an hour, or less than half an hour, say like 10-15 minutes, 5 minutes for a ghusl, and another 5 minutes to get dressed, and then she's got 5 minutes to pray. And how's she going to pray? or strange circumstances, or when time is literally about to exit. For example, a menstruating woman, she's come off her cycle and she's only got 15 minutes to pray or 10 minutes to pray. She does a 5-minute ghusl and she takes another minute or two to dress, right? And now she's got 3 minutes to pray, 2 minutes to pray, and she has to just discharge her obligation there and then. The only way she can do that is by praying like this. Another situation, you've woken up for Fajr. You've literally got 5 minutes. You've literally got 5 minutes left, right? So bleary-eyed, you run into the bathroom, you make a quick wudu, and it's very quick to take out the sunnah elements of the wudu, as we learned in the previous lectures, to make a quick wudu and then to quickly do the obligatory elements, and literally within 5 minutes you can make your wudu and have prayed, and you're done. Obviously, this is not a situation where you are making a habit of doing this. You'd always make sure that you're in a position to pray properly, right? You wake up early, you pray properly, you pace yourself throughout the prayer times, you know what's going on. But if you were ever in a situation like this, then this is where you would use this.